Today we're going to learn about context clues, which will help us understand what we're reading even better than we already do. Our goal today is to learn how to use sentence-level context as a clue to the meaning of a word or phrase. And to do that, we're going to learn how to find context clues. We're also going to learn how to organize those clues in a graphic organizer. And finally, we're going to learn how to use those clues to determine the meaning of the word. The most important thing you can do while you read is make sure you understand what you're reading. If you don't understand, you can use this trick to help you make sure that you understand all of the words. When you come across a word that you don't know, I want you to stop reading. Don't just keep going like you understand perfectly. That will only confuse you more. You need to stop and notice that that's a word that you don't know. To do that, you can underline the word. After this, you can keep reading, but that underline will remind you that you need to come back to it. When you come back to it, you can use a graphic organizer to figure out that word using context clues. And then you can write in your own definition once you've figured it out. Finally, you can reread the text with your definition. Now that you know what all the words mean, the text should make a lot more sense. Let's give it a try. Read along with me. A dog, looking out for its afternoon nap, jumped into the manger of an ox and lay there cozily upon the straw. But soon, the ox, returning from its afternoon work, came up to the manger and wanted to eat some of the straw. The dog, in a rage, being awakened from its slumber, stood up and barked at the ox, and whenever it came near, attempted to bite it. At last, the ox had to give up the hope of getting at the straw, and went away muttering, "Ah, people often grudge others what they cannot enjoy themselves." Let's remember our strategy that we just talked about. When we come across a word we don't know, we need to stop reading. Then we need to underline the word. Then we're going to use a graphic organizer to figure it out with context clues. Then we'll write in our own definition. And finally, we'll reread the text with our definitions. Let's take a look at that graphic organizer. It's pretty simple with just a bunch of different columns. We can write in the words that we don't know and where we found them. Because this is a pretty short passage, we're going to just say which sentence they're in. So sentence 1, sentence 2, etc. If it were a longer passage, we might want to say paragraph 1, paragraph 2, and so on. Then we'll write in any clues that are in the passage that will help us understand what the word means. Finally, we'll figure out the meaning. Remember that it's important that our meaning doesn't need to be perfect. You are not a human dictionary, and that's okay. As long as our meaning makes sense in the context, then it's good enough, and we're ready to move on. You ready to get started? Okay, let's go. We're going to reread and stop reading when we come to a word we don't know. A dog, looking out for its afternoon nap, jumped into the manger. That's a new word for me. I'm going to underline, of an ox, and lay there cozily upon the straw. But soon the ox, returning from its afternoon work, came up to the manger, going to underline it again, and wanted to eat some of the straw. The dog, in a rage, being awakened from its slumber, that's a new word, stood up and barked at the ox, and whenever it came near, attempted to bite it. At last, the ox had to give up the hope of getting at the straw and went away muttering. That's a new word for me. Ah, people often grudge others what they cannot enjoy themselves. You know, the word grudge I'm pretty familiar with. I know that somebody can hold a grudge against somebody else. But the way they're using it here doesn't really make sense to me, so I'm going to underline it so I can figure it out. Okay, now that we know all of the words in the text that we're having trouble with, we're ready to use our graphic organizer. We can go ahead and write in those words. Now we need to write in where we found each of those words. And remember, we're just going to say which sentence. So manger, for instance, is in sentence 1 and sentence 2. slumber in sentence 3, and muttering and grudge are both in sentence 4. Now we need to look for clues. Let's start with the word manger. The clues that I found are that it's a manger of an ox. It belongs to the ox. That's important. And the ox wanted to eat, and that's why it went up to the manger. And I know that there's straw inside the manger. So I know that ox eats straw, and I know that straw was in the manger. So I'm guessing that the meaning has something to do with like a container that holds the ox's food. So I'm going to go ahead and write that down. It's a container for food. Now that I've got it in my graphic organizer, I can write it over by the text so that when I'm rereading later, I can see it right there. It's a container for food. Now we're ready to move on to the word slumber. Let's take a look at the clues here. There's really just one big one, awakened. The dog awakened from its slumber. When I awaken, I'm always asleep, so I would awaken from my sleep. Sleep is another word that means the same thing as slumber, it seems. So I'm going to write that in. And then I can write it over by the text as well. So slumber and sleep mean about the same thing here, it seems. Now I'm ready to look at that last sentence. At last the ox had to give up the hope of getting at the straw and went away muttering. I'm going to stop here. Muttering's a little tricky because there aren't a lot of clues. I know that he went away muttering, so I'm going to write down went away. And then I also noticed something right after the word muttering. Do you see those two little lines together? Those are called quotation marks. You see them anytime somebody is speaking. So if I wanted to say, Ms. Coldren said, be quiet would go inside those quotation marks because that's exactly what I said. So anytime you see those quotation marks, it's a good clue that somebody is talking here. So it's almost like the word muttering is another word for saying or said. So he went away saying. That makes a lot of sense here. So I'm going to write down the word saying. And then I'm going to write it over by the text. Now I'm going to look at the last word. People often grudge others what they cannot enjoy themselves. I know that the ox had to give up the hope of getting at the straw. And then he went away muttering, and this is what he said. So I'm guessing that the ox is kind of upset because he had to give up. And then it also says that you grudge others what you cannot enjoy yourself. So cannot enjoy seems like an important clue too. I'm guessing that the ox was probably in a pretty bad mood. I know I would if somebody was sleeping on top of all of my food. So maybe people get angry at others, is what he's trying to say. Let's go ahead and write that down. People often get angry at others when they cannot enjoy themselves. Okay, now that we have all of our definitions written down by the text, we're ready to reread the text with our definitions. Let's go. A dog, looking out for its afternoon nap, jumped into the container for food of an ox and lay there cozily upon the straw. But soon the ox, returning from its afternoon work, came up to the container for food and wanted to eat some of the straw. The dog, in a rage, being awakened from its slumber, stood up and barked at the ox. You know what? I just messed up. I should have said sleep instead of slumber. Let me go back and try that again. The dog, in a rage, being awakened from its sleep, stood up and barked at the ox, and whenever it came near, attempted to bite it. At last, the ox had to give up the hope of getting at the straw, and went away, saying, people often get angry at others when they cannot enjoy themselves. Doesn't that text make a lot more sense now that we know all of the words that we're reading? I think that you're ready to try this on your own. Remember, don't just keep reading when you don't know a word. Stop and underline it, then use a graphic organizer to figure it out. I know you can do it.